Hey everyone, welcome to the PC Perspective Podcast. This is episode 583 being recorded Wednesday. Yes, a Wednesday, believe it or not, April 22nd, 2020. I'm Jim Tanis.
Retro.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Josh Walrath.
I'm Sebastian Peak.
I'm that old guy, Brett Van Sproonberg.
Yes, as he has been labeled by the YouTube chat, the old guy in the upper right corner. Of course, I also saw that somebody said that the youngest of us all was that handsome fellow in the lower right there.
Mm.
Yes.
Yes. And he doesn't need to worry about giving himself haircuts during the quarantine.
No, I don't. Well, no, wait. Yeah, I do. I give myself haircuts. Got a razor.
Sure.
That's a little more practiced at it than most.
Yes, that's true.
I have been doing this for about 23 years.
Well,
that's a lot of money saved on haircuts.
In the new normal,
razors,
as they say, it's a skill to have, a skill in demand. But thanks everyone for joining us. We're glad you could join us. Like I said, we do record these. We used to record pretty consistently on a Wednesday, but now that we're all remote, it's hard to do that. Usually my fault. But if we don't do it on a Wednesday, we're almost certainly going to have it for you on that next day on Thursday. So once a week, you can look forward to something from us. And if you'd like to join us as we record these live, because we stream out to YouTube and Twitch, and you can join us at 10 p.m. Eastern time is when we usually do it, regardless of day. And if you want to know when we're about to go live, you can head over to pcpro.com/subscribe and join our mailing list there. It's we don't use it for marketing or anything. It's just a simple email I send out an hour or two before we're about to go live. Or also I send it if we're not going to have a show. If something's delayed or postponed or canceled or whatever, I'll let you know there as well. And of course, you can also support us here at PCPer. We've got the Patreon campaign at patreon.com/PCPer. And we really appreciate everyone who contributes there. And as I said, I've received a number of messages because of the current world crisis and economic situation. People have had to, cancel their subscription or their support. And we completely understand. I've received some very nice emails, people feeling like they have to explain. It's not necessary. As I said, we're nothing here. We're just hoping to be some entertainment for you. And you have to take care of yourselves and your families first. And so no explanation necessary. We appreciate it if you can, but don't beat yourself up over it. We understand it's tough out there. But if you do want to become a patron and you become a new patron or up your pledge, you can always send us a message. You can either change your name field or send us a message through the Patreon system after the fact, and I'll read whatever you send us. And that can usually be funny or embarrassing, however you'd like to play it. But let's get into the news this week. First, if you listened to last week's show, we talked about the new NUCs, the new interesting form factor NUCs from Intel. And Sebastian had a review for us last week that wasn't. We talked about it during the show, but the review, he hadn't really finished all the testing yet. And I know he went into some detail here. He's got the full review is now up at the site. It's got a lot of tests, a lot of thoughts from Sebastian about this very interesting, unusual product that Intel's put together for us here. So Sebastian, what other points did you want to make or reiterate following last week's teaser?
Well, when we talked last, it was 4,000 words sitting in a Word document and a bunch of photos and a lot of incomplete testing. So I didn't really have the full picture yet. And I kind of expected to find some weaknesses. I hadn't done any thermal testing yet. I was a little worried about that. Obviously, the form factor is very small. And for the power that this thing has, as far as its actual CPU compute power, and we were using the most powerful GPU can cram into this. So that's something that was surprising. When I actually finished testing, I found better than expected CPU performance. I didn't do a lot of logging. I did just enough to present a little graph in the review to show what sustained CPU frequencies were like all core. And that was during just a run of Cinebench R20, because of course you start running Cinebench R20 and you're stressing the cores pretty much to 100% consistently. And I wanted to see where it started throttling the CPU back. But I think of throttling as lower than expected speeds. And this is a mobile part. We're talking about the i9-9980HK. it has a nominal speed of 2.4 gigahertz, and it can boost all the way up to 5 gigahertz if it has the headroom, thermal headroom power. Just so for very like typical desktop usage, you're very frequently boosting all the way up to around 5 gigahertz, 4.8, somewhere in there, opening up a browser window, using your computer the way you normally would. You're usually getting a lot closer to that threshold, the 5 gigahertz number. But all cores being stressed, you do find the limits of that 45 watt TDP, even though it does, of course, consume more than that beyond 2.4 gigahertz. And what I found was in Cinebench, after about 15 seconds, it would drop down to about 3.2 gigahertz all core. But it stayed there, and it would stay there throughout the duration of the test. So given the excellent thermals that this thing actually has, between the active cooling on the compute element itself, which is a small laptop blower style fan, and the two 80 millimeter fans on the top, which are drawing warm air up from the compute element and the graphics card that's installed if you have one, then it seems to be able to sustain those clocks a lot longer than I would have expected in something this small. And to give you an idea of how small this is, I don't have one. I see one I could grab. Imagine a mini ITX motherboard box. If you've ever bought a mini ITX motherboard, the box that it comes in is roughly the same size as this. So it's a very small unit. And I saw some
red box.
Yeah, and I've seen comments saying, "Oh, you can build a better mini ITX system than that, etc." And the price, as we talked about last week, that's going to be a huge barrier to entry here. It's expensive. You're paying for the compute unit. You're paying for this modular computer on a PCI Express card, and that on its own, the listing that I've seen at B&H Photo, that you can pre-order the compute element, it's $13.99. So I mean, most of the $1,600 cost of this Nook 9 Extreme kit is that $1,400 compute element. But what's interesting about the compute element is you're getting literally an entire computer. And I went through the components on the board and identified as many of the chips as I could. Some of them I was familiar with, some of them I had to look up, and I linked to any data sheets I could find on any of these chips in the review in the teardown section. And it's high-end stuff. It's a newer Thunderbolt controller, and it's a perfectly high quality audio codec from like Realtek. I believe it's like a ALC 256. You've got dual M.2 slots, both of which can accommodate the longer 110 millimeter NVMe drives, such as the Intel drive that we received with the review unit. But the connectivity is excellent. You've got Thunderbolt 3, USB 3.1. You have regular and Type-C connections on the board. You've got very good quality wired LAN. You have dual Intel gigabit NICs. And that top end, at least 9th generation top end CPU. And we mentioned that last week too. Like, this is 9th gen. It would have been nice to see 10th gen, but considering what they were going for with this, if you compare 10th gen to this, like, the difference would be rather marginal. Like, for example, the 10th generation mobile parts in this category, like the H series, are going to offer slightly higher boost clocks. However, you can adjust performance in the setup in this. In the UEFI setup, there's performance adjustments and there's cooling adjustments. And one of the advantages of 10th generation over 9th is slightly higher memory speeds supported. But I was able to go in and actually change XMP settings, and the memory that came with this, if you're willing to spend money for 3200 DDR4 laptop memory, you can absolutely run it at that speed without any problem. So even though I did my testing at 2666, because that's the default supported speed for this CPU, it'll easily run 3200. So you can kind of create your own 10th gen is what I'm saying. It's based on the same architecture. Some of the improvements that they brought to the 10th gen, since it's very similar. It's like a slight speed bump to this. And the platform, I'm not sure what changes we would have seen with the platform, because there's already, Intel Wi-Fi 6 included with this, etc. So But in general, my thoughts about this were basically that the boost behavior was a little bit better than I thought it was going to be because there's better thermals than I expected. And the noise levels overall were great. I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but what would happen is, and this is something that Steve at Gamers Nexus pointed out in his video review, which is very in-depth, it's very good. He talked about the inconsistency of the noise. It's that sort of cardinal sin. If you're trying to make something as unobtrusive as possible, it's always better to have a consistent sound than it is to have an uneven sound. And instead of being a consistent like 36 decibels or something, it was barely audible at idle in the low 30s. Then it would spike up to about, I measured consistently 40.6 dBA on my sound pressure meter, but only for a moment. So it would hit 40.6 and then drop down to 33.5 to 34.5. And it would stay there until the next little spiky burst. And I saw there was a little bit of granularity with thermal controls in the setup, but it was already set to a 2% per degree increase. So I'll have to go back and update the article if setting that to a wider percentage or a smaller percentage makes any difference at all. But this is something that maybe is a firmware update away. It's fan behavior. And I would like to see a much longer period before the fan starts to speed up. Like if you're just going to be doing something for a split second, like opening up a browser window, you really don't need to start pushing the fan to its highest RPMs and then lowering it back down again. Like the Cinebench runs were a perfect example of this. It did a phenomenal job of keeping the system cool, even with all core runs like that, or the extended X264 benchmark I ran on it. But it wouldn't settle to about 34.5 decibels until it had been running for a minute or two. So we'll have to see if that is something that they can address. But other than that, I mean, it's the big sticking point with this has to be the price. I'm sure you guys would agree that $1,639 for a mobile Core i9 part, and it's a full motherboard and it has everything on it, except you do have to bring your own RAM and storage to the table. And that price does not include a discrete GPU if you want to add one, which in this case was another $420 just because they went with the highest end model available.
That's a lot of nuts.
Yeah.
Not to quote one of my favorite films of all time.
There's no way I could justify that as a media server to myself. It's far more than that. It's, I live in a very tiny apartment and I need a single room and I need a full-size machine's power, but I can't do it. Yeah, if I had the budget, all right, $1,600, call in another $400 or $500 to add in a GPU of reasonable quality and a bit of storage, and it's $2,000. I mean, sure, you can't build it yourself. I'm sorry, not without a full set of tools and somehow to source that chip on a board. So I see it, but I look at it and I go, wow, it's just, if you'd found something that was about half the power, half the price, 3/4 the price, maybe.
So who's this for?
It's an interesting concept. I think one of our viewers last week asked, "Are we ever going to see another one of these?" And I mean, I don't think it's going to sell particularly well. It's interesting to see Intel tackling just a new form factor, a new theory behind how something like this should go together. But yeah, I mean, and my point last week too was, yeah, you're right. You couldn't build an ITX system this small, but you can get, I mean, it's too big. The original Nooks, those tiny little ones, those were great because you can mount them to the back of a display, or you can, stick them under the desk or mount them under. I mean, they're really easy to hide, and they make great for simple desktops or media centers or whatever. This is too big to do that. So you're going to have a box on your desk. And if you go just a little bit bigger, then you are into ITX sizes. And in that case, then you have all the flexibility and you're saving money. based on part selection and everything. So I just don't, as Brett said, I don't know who this is for.
You got to think that Francois is rolling around in his GTR.
Perhaps.
Sure.
Come on, he was a Skull Trail guy, and they did that for a high performance, that whole skull head thing, and now you get an i9 that runs at 2.4 gigahertz, and what did you say the boost was?
It has it's 5 gigahertz single core boost.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's impressive. I mean, it's the performance characteristics of that platform, which are impressive for a 45 watt base TDP mobile platform. But it's not. You could put a desktop system or a desktop chip in your mini ITX build and get even more performance. A few folks here in the chat were saying, how would this compare to like these new 4900 H AMD Ryzen systems, and they'd compare.
You're just not ever going to find one of those in a mini PC. How many years have we been talking about? Well, I mean, if we got one of these like an Intel NUC, I want a Ryzen NUC. I want a Ryzen APU mini PC, and then randomly one or two will show up over time. I actually have one.
They always have one, usually.
They would have one, but you couldn't find it anywhere for sale. ECS has at least one Leva that's AMD powered. I have one here. It's the SF110-A320. But again, those are small form factor systems. They're smaller than this, and they're hampered by the limitation of a 35 watt TDP APU, which is going to be very good for just basic everyday computing, but so is a NUC. This is a new form factor, and it's a new concept. So the question always becomes, who is this for? Who does this serve? Because for some reason, there's this perception that if it's not 4 by 4 inches and 1.5 inches tall, it's too big for a living room. It's too big for anything. And then you might as well just put a new box out there.
They should have called it an Ultra NUC.
NUC
Speaking
Pro.
of Intel form factors that didn't make any sense and caught on.
Yeah.
It's the new Ultra book.
If this is serving an enthusiast community, it's interesting, and I think the problem is the people who seem the most enthusiastic about really small form factor, it's like an exercise. It's a hobbyist thing. So it's how small can I build an ITX system? And if here's a company that's coming out with the full solution, like we've already chosen the form factor for you, we've chosen the modular approach to the CPU for you, and we've chosen the chassis design and size and orientation, because there's only one orientation for this chassis. That's something I saw complaining about too, which is valid. I mean, you cannot lay this on its side unless you were to fashion some sort of feet for it. It needs to be able to breathe from both mesh side panels. So it's designed to be standing up on its base like this. So that does complicate placement, especially in a living room. So if you don't have some available space up top on a cabinet or beneath your TV, for example, then it wouldn't make as much sense in the living room as like a system you could stack with a console. But the reality of any computer in your living room that has any kind of significant horsepower in it is that it's going to need some breathing space around it anyway, especially if you're throwing a desktop class GPU into it. So I don't think of this as a mini PC. This is, to me, like a proof of concept of a almost blade server like approach to computing that probably doesn't make sense for a consumer product. It's probably too expensive to be a successful consumer product. And then in the face of how good and how cheap relatively desktop parts are with more horsepower than this, from an economical standpoint, it doesn't make any sense either. I think it's cool. And when you actually go hands-on with it and you see how compact this is, I've built many ITX systems before, and I've tried building really small ones. I've had the privilege of being able to build inside the Ncase M1. It was one of my first reviews for this website. And then I also got to build in the Dancase's A4, and that was fantastic. Pretty much the same concept is in here as in the Dancases, where you sandwich like motherboard CPU with GPU to maximize space. And like I said, if you were to compare this to a motherboard box, there's about an inch in height differentiating these two. but they're a very similar width and depth, or maybe like a half inch apart, maybe not even. So it's very close to the size of the box that your mini ITX motherboard came in. So if you're dreaming of that ultra small system that could unobtrusively sit on the back corner of a desk, this is absolutely that. I have tried on a small setup I've kept in my dining room for years now to have a small desktop of some kind. And for a long time, it was a Skull Trail Nook or Skull Canyon, whichever one that is, the one with the 6th gen Core i7 in it. But it was always frustrating not to have a discrete GPU in that. And every time I would move up from that, I'd be going into a much larger mini ITX box so I could put a desktop GPU into it. And I never spent the money on a DAN cases. I've tried different things. Like, it was last year, actually, I did that console-sized case review. I can't remember the name of it right now. And it was about as small as you can build and actually have a full-size GPU in it. And I put a 2080 or 2080 Ti or something insane in there just for fun, for the review. I put a 9900K in it. But the thermals were obnoxious, and it was very loud because the fans were spinning for all they were worth. I had a CPU fan going 3,000 RPMs just to try to keep from overheating. Oh, there it is. The Sentry 2.0. And it was a very well-realized case, but another example of, for best results, you probably had to have it in a vertical orientation. It came with a stand, and that would allow it to breathe a little bit better. It was possible to use it either way, but that was considerably larger than this. It wasn't as tall, but the footprint of it was much bigger because you were kind of placing everything on the same plane. You had the motherboard in one compartment and the graphics card in another compartment, and you had your storage kind of all around, and you had to use a big chunk of it for your SFX PSU. And you had to make a decision between either a liquid cooler for your CPU or a full-size GPU. There was not room for both. So I just find it interesting that there seems to be multiple camps about small form factor. One camp is it has to be as small as possible, but still have desktop components. Some people are just looking for a mini PC, maybe a pre-made solution like Zotac or Intel or somebody like that. And then there's the fanless community, which is a totally different animal entirely, where it seems like they will take something like a run-of-the-mill mini PC and fashion some case that's 10 times larger, and then because it's fanless, somehow this is worth all of the time and expense and additional space on your desk. So, and that sounds really snarky. I personally think that almost every one of these systems would be better realized if it had at least one very low speed fan. And that's why I liked design choices Intel made, like the two 80 millimeter fans up top that spin very slowly. Like, that's a good idea. You slowly draw warm air up the top, but you know, it's not perfect. I wish this was something that they sold for like $200, and you'd get the enclosure, and then you go out and pick one of their compute cards, and they do absolutely have cheaper compute elements, but I feel like it's too much of a stretch to say you're limited to high-end laptop performance, but you're paying full desktop prices for it. And I think that's where people are going to have a big issue with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, getting a full-size gaming system would get you a high-end Ryzen. I mean, not the highest, but a 3600X and a 2080, RTX with an NVMe drive and 16 or 32 gigs of memory, depending on how it all should, comes out. And that's the entire system.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you're not going to get a R9 3900X or a 3950X, but yeah, you're still going to get pretty close to that performance for a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
Because you're not even counting memory, drive, and graphics card.
No.
So easily another 500.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, also, if we look at Intel's...
I was going lowball, Josh, because you could spend $1,200 on the graphics card alone if you wanted.
Yeah.
And by volume, from a case perspective, don't forget the power supply. You didn't mention that. That's, I don't know. Do they have that in the basement of the Nook? I don't remember. that an internal?
Yep, it is. It was actually just announced from FSP, and it's a very compact 500 watt model. And so this is
it resembles like a Cisco power supply or something.
Yep,
it resembles one of the slide-in server power supplies that I've seen in 1U units. Mm-hmm.
Yes. It's just a slightly shorter version of that. It has a form factor. I'm forgetting the name of it right now. But yes, it's basically a server power supply. It has a 40 millimeter fan. When I was running benchmarks for extended periods of time, I did finally hear it. It's not very loud, but it has a higher pitched tone because it's 40 millimeters. So that's another thing to consider.
Yeah.
Oh, is it?
It's a weird flex, but it's okay.
Yeah. Well, I had to throw Kent's name in there because I think it's being called out as a game. So. You're welcome.
Oh, they drinking in the chat?
Yeah. Every time we mention one of the departed Tesla crowd.
How different it will be to talk about this next topic, because we're talking about like what is essentially too expensive and questionable cost, performance, benefit, and small form factor, etc. And then this announcement. Well, maybe
this new announcement is a surprising extension of the Ryzen family. Sebastian you talked with AMD on this and wrote up the story. So as you say, Zen 2 goes mainstream. I mean, I would argue it was mostly mainstream already, but they've extended the lower end, the more affordable end of the family with 2 new processors. Tell us what's going on here.
Yeah, this is just rounding out the product stack. Ryzen 3000 obviously has been a huge success, and they started off with the high end. So we had 5, 7, and 9, and I think 5 came a little bit later. What was seeded out to reviewers initially for that 7.7 launch last year, the July 7 launch, was the Ryzen 7 and Ryzen 9. And the very high end, of course, came later with the 3950X, the 16 core. And since then, we've seen prices stabilize. We've seen availability get considerably better. And now it's not, can I find, say, a Ryzen 9 3900X in stock for $499? It's, well, this place has it on sale for $439, but I think someplace last week had it on sale for like $425. And it's extremely easy to get. And that's become a sort of go-to high-end enthusiast part. And it's less than $500, depending on, Amazon price fluctuation. So that's been a tremendous win for them, obviously. And then they have that flagship part, the 3950X, which has better availability than I ever thought it was going to, because if you understand the nature of the chiplet design, for that product to even exist, they have to have 4 chiplets, all of which have all 4 cores enabled. And it has to be able to clock higher than any of the other
chiplets.
Oh, that's right. They're 8 each.
3.
I'm thinking of the servers. I'm thinking of Threadripper. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
So both have to have all 8 cores, and all 8 have to be able to run at 4.7, which is the highest boost in the whole lineup. So and pricing has gotten better. Like, Josh, what is the Ryzen 5 3600 selling for these days? It's not 200.
It's 190 to 199. Usually it's on sale.
Is it still? Okay. I swear I've seen it for as little as 160. That might have been like a holiday sale.
I think that was the 3600 got to that low.
That's what I'm talking about. Yep. So the 3600X is still around 200, which is $50 below MSRP. Yeah. And then the 3600 sells routinely for $30 or $40 below. But even so, they didn't have that $100 CPU. And for that, we were talking about, earlier. Well, it wasn't earlier this year. Maybe it was late last year. Whenever it was that the 1600 AF came to light, and that was obviously a product that was a last generation product. It's actually 2 generations old. However, it sort of quietly moved off.
It was the last generation product, but they just marketed it as a 1600 rather than a 2600.
Yeah. So it's literally a 2600 that's like 100 megahertz slower, right?
Yeah, and they sell it for $99 or $90 or whatever. Yeah.
And now
very popular.
You don't have to look for that AF on the box for a 1600, even though that is a 6-core part. So there's still a place for it. But they've announced 2 quad-core SMT parts. These are both 8-thread, 4 core parts, the Ryzen 3 3300X and 3100. The difference between these two is clock speeds. They're both unlocked. One of them is 3.8 gigahertz base, 4.3 boost. That's the 3300X. And the 3100 is 3.6 gigahertz base and only 3.9 gigahertz boost. They have the same 16 meg level 3 cache. Both have 2 megs of level 2. They support the same. I mean, it's just going to be all the same as the rest of this Ryzen 3000 family. DDR4 3200 support. These are 65 watts a piece. I'm sure we'll see lower wattage variants of these at some point, or configurable depending on what the system integrator needs, but they're both listed as 65 watts. Pricing is, of course, outstanding because the 3100 is $99, so they get that $100 price point in the Zen 2 family for the first time. And then they're only charging a $20 premium, as I remember words, for the 3300X. So to get 400 megahertz faster speeds out of the box, $20. So that's going to be $120. And they're coming May 21st, is what they say. But there's more.
Well, you got to have a new chipset to put these low-cost processors in.
You better believe it. I mean, not that you couldn't put these in.
Thing.
Yeah. I will assuredly be putting one of these things in like a, X570 board. But they did announce a new chipset, the B550 chipset, which they didn't say a lot about it in their press release, but it is a mainstream chipset. So the word mainstream tends to be used in marketing instead of budget, but just replace the word mainstream with budget as you read this. And you're going to see cheap B550 motherboards. And what is the one thing that B450 couldn't give you if you were running Ryzen 3000 in a low-cost setup, Josh?
A massage.
Well,
True.
A wax job?
You're thinking a different interface, aren't you, Sebastian?
I was, and for some reason I was thinking that we have this vocal proponent of PCI Express 4.0 in our midst who's playing coy right now.
Ooh.
So for the first time...
even though, in theory, B450 boards would have been able to support PCIe 4.0,
mm-hmm.
Now we finally have official support. But it is limited between pretty much the chip, the CPU, the graphics card, and the M.2 slot. B550, it still connects to the CPU via 4x PCIe 3.0 lanes. And so all of the lanes coming off of that, as far as I know, are PCIe 3.0. So any extra M.2, which there may be some, won't have the PCIe 4.0, but you'll still have at least graphics and one kind of, I guess they call them Ultra M.2 ports. And so finally, official support up and down the line. And these are probably going to start $90 to $100 depending on the model. And, X570s usually bottom out around $150 to $140. So there'll be a little bit of overlap, but not much. But it really does extend the Ryzen 3000 series and PCIe 4.0 down to that $100 motherboard cost mark, which is big for AMD because a lot of the customers are, they're cheap like me.
Well, now, but they also have all the Intel converts now, all the high-end enthusiast converts. So they're hitting all segments of the pricing market.
Yeah, look at their naming convention. There's no secret here that AMD modeled their Ryzen processors from the beginning after Intel, because Intel had the Core i3, Core i5, Core i7, and then later the Core i9. And we have Ryzen 3, Ryzen 5, Ryzen 7, and Ryzen 9 to compete head-to-head every step of the way. And they've pushed the envelope on core count. And I cannot remember if the last announced or currently available Core i3 parts are hyper-threaded again. Didn't they bring that back?
They did, yeah. Their response to getting spanked was reintroducing the multi-threading pretty much across the board.
The feature on all their other chips.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's great. This is 4 cores and 8 threads. Think about it, Josh. You were talking to me about this the other day. You were running up until recently. What processor in your
7700K? You know, the i7 7700K. I mean, that was one of the more popular Intel CPUs in quite a few years because it was, you know, a good balance of Intel pricing, which was what, $330 to $360 depending on when you got it, and you had 4 fast cores and you had multi-threading, and game performance and everything else seemed to do perfectly fine. So I mean, the 7700K sold very, very well and very popular. And these ones, the R3 3300X looks to be very, very similar in performance, but you're paying 1/3 the price. Plus, you get PCIe 4.0.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that it will be anywhere near as hot because I specifically bought a 7700K. I think I got mine on a deal for like $309 when I was doing a lot of cooler testing for the site. And so for a long time, every cooler test that I did for PC Perspective was on a 7700K because it was so hot. And it would be pushing anything but the largest coolers to like 90 degrees under load. And I actually spun that same CPU up again for a folding at home system today. I was just like, oh yeah, it's 86 degrees right now, even with a giant Be Quiet cooler on it. So to have that level of performance, I would assume, and we haven't seen the chips yet, we haven't done our own benchmarking, but on paper, it's going to be kind of similar to like a 6700K or a 7700K because of the clock speeds and the core and thread count. And that's just it's astonishing because the 7700K, Kaby Lake was not that long ago. We're talking about, I think I bought that CPU in 2017. It's been like 3 years ago. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, $120. And yeah.
And more efficient and more features.
For Intel pricing for an enthusiast class chip, 360 at the time was pretty good because they had stuff that went all the way up to and beyond $1,000. And so people were thinking, hey, I've got this 4-core 8-thread chip that's pretty fast in everything that I do, and it's only $360. And yeah, 3 years later, it's 1/3 the cost and probably half the actual TDP. And I'm talking actual TDP, not like you said. It's a
SDP,
warm chip.
And this is interesting too because one of the things, and we'll talk about this a little later on, is that Intel is still pushing is their gaming advantage, what they market as a gaming advantage. And it's true that you can create situations where Intel parts outperform their Ryzen counterparts in gaming. As we'll get into that, but this is now, the focus from Intel has been on the higher end because of the Ryzen 7s and 9s being so versatile, good gaming performance and productivity with the core advantage. Now you're looking at this Core i3, maybe low end of Core i5 competitive price range, and if these game well and are as efficient as we expect them to be based on their cousins and the rest of the lineup, that's another area where Intel is going to be very threatened and certainly going to have to lower pricing again. Because that's you could argue, and Intel does, their marketing is you can buy an i3 and even an i5 and game on a budget system at acceptable rates. But here you go now. Now you can go with Ryzen, save some power, and as Sebastian said, we got to test these, but we'll see how they perform in the real world. To borrow a phrase from Team Blue.
Yeah, I look at stuff like this and the low cost. I think about the old like slot one Celeron era. I wish that the really, really cheap parts were also the ones that were known to be great overclockers, and we could all just go out and buy a 3100 and see how high we could push it. But
well,
we've
if they
all
ever
seen
put a proper Celeron out again.
Yeah.
Well, the Pentium came back, so maybe the Celeron will come back too.
Well, it does occasionally, but it's like an Atom or one of the various Bay Trail type versions.
Oh, I'm pretty sure you can buy a very low cost laptop with a quote unquote Celeron in it right now, like a quad core Atom.
Yeah,
Flipbook.
Don't you think it's a little strange?
They're at Walmart.
Don't you think it's interesting that we still refer to a part that was released 22 years ago, and nothing has really surpassed it in terms of its capabilities and its price and what it just kind of brought to the table. I mean, Celeron,
and that 50% overclock.
Yeah, you can run it at 450, and it outperformed a Pentium 3 450.
Yeah,
all for Celeron prices. Yeah, we have not seen its like. Again, some things may have gotten a little close, but yeah, the kind of the structured, feature, performance, and limitations have all been in place by Intel that you couldn't have another 300A. It's very sad. Very sad.
Only problem was it sucked on multi-threaded stuff.
Well, it was a single core.
Touche. Yeah.
As
all
multi-threaded stuff were.
It maximized. It provided 100% CPU utilization for every core that it had.
It's true.
The core
scaled extremely well across.
The core affinity was out of this world.
You wouldn't believe the ping times between its cores were non-existent.
Zero.
All right.
Only goes to core 0? Not a problem.
So that's the Ryzen 3 3300X and Ryzen 3 3100. No X on that one. They're slated for launch, according to AMD, May 21st, and then that B450 chipset will be out in June. You'll see those motherboards. So great. We'll keep an eye on that, and we'll see if we can get some stuff into test and see how this performs and see what Intel has to say about this as well. Let's talk about NVIDIA now, though. They had an interesting release in the last week. I don't recall exactly what day they announced it, but they came out and announced something I wasn't expecting. I don't think anyone was really expecting, but it's called NVIDIA RTX Voice. And now, of course, when Jensen and those NVIDIA guys were trying to sell us an RTX and all this machine learning and AI stuff on your consumer graphics card, they did say things like, this is more than gaming. This is new ways of doing things and leveraging this.
It just works.
Sure, yeah. And we're going to see one of those examples here is this little utility you can download called RTX Voice. And how it works is that it creates a virtual audio interface, and you have to have the latest drivers, and officially you have to have an RTX card, and the latest version of Windows 10. So you install this little app, this little utility. We'll have a link if you're interested in the show notes. And then you assign your audio input and output devices if you want. You can use one or the other or both. And then it creates an RTX audio virtual interface that you then pass to your program, whether it's your speakers or your Discord or Skype or whatever. From what we can see,
you're saying that I should use this.
Well, I was thinking when they announced this is something we probably should look into, because the whole point is it then uses machine learning and it uses those tensor cores and all that computational power to analyze your audio signal and remove everything that's not your voice. And it works, believe it or not, remarkably well. And there's a lot of videos on YouTube. Epos Fox, who's a sort of a content creator focused YouTuber, had a video demoing it. Barnacle-Ys Nerdgasm is that the YouTuber who used to work for Microsoft. He had a video demoing it. And in his video, he had a fan right on his mic, and he was banging a hammer. And then so you're listening to that over his voice, and then he turned it on, and it just went away. And it doesn't change your voice, because there's another solution we'll talk about here in a minute, a software solution that's relatively new. But people are saying that if the ambient noise gets too poor or too loud, it really does mess up how your voice sounds. But this supposedly doesn't. And I've only had a chance to test it out a little bit, and it is, from what I can tell, working very well. And then the beauty, though, of the input and output is that if, like, you're on one of these Zoom calls that we all have to be on nowadays with 30 people on your team, and somebody doesn't realize their mic's on and their dog's barking or the vacuum's going or the kids come home and throw their stuff on the ground and start yelling, you turn it on your output, and then you don't have to hear it because it'll analyze the audio coming to you and then clean that all up for you so that what you hear is pristine. And so not just for your comfort, but if you're doing something like this, we don't have it set up this way. It's all software here. But if I had a physical mixer that could bring a line in from you guys, you wouldn't need to run this. I could theoretically run this, clean up your audio on my end before it goes into the stream. So there's a lot of applications here. It's free. It's exciting. It's in beta. It's not perfect, but it's the best I've ever seen of this kind of solution. So check it out. Now, as I said, NVIDIA says you have to have an RTX card. It's in the name, RTX Voice. But very, very quickly, people discovered, this is a forum post over at Guru 3D, that if you just change a little file in the installer, it seems to work just fine on earlier generation, non-RTX cards. There is a limit. I think I saw somebody got down to the 5 series, like the GTX 580, and it didn't work there. But 7 series, 10 series, it seems to be working just fine. I guess the trick is you have to try to install it first if you don't have an RTX card, and it'll fail the install saying you don't meet the requirements. Then it creates this temp directory, and you go in there and add this little code or remove this constraints.
You remove that.
Yeah, and save it, and then it'll run it again. And what do you know? Apparently, it doesn't need tensor cores, or maybe there's tensor cores hiding on your card somewhere that NVIDIA never told us about.
Obviously, even officially, NVIDIA supports RTX features on non-RTX cards. Last year, they enabled that because you have programmable shaders. You can tell them to do what you need them to do. So it kind of makes sense you to be able to have this working on Pascal, but there's going to be a performance hit because there's going to be a certain amount of your GPU overhead being taken up by RTX Voice. I don't know what that is. So if you're streaming,
regardless, even on RTX, people are noticing, which is interesting because it shouldn't be.
Yeah, you'd think it would just be the RT cores,
right? But people have noticed there is a performance hit, and it varies significantly. It's as little as 3%. It's as high as I think I saw. If you have it on both the input and output, it can be up to 15%. So that's not insignificant. It depends on what you're doing, but that is the state of things now. And again, it is a beta. It's the first release, so we'll see if that gets cleaned up a little bit. But there is a performance hit even on RTX cards, which is again surprising considering how this is marketed. You really shouldn't be seeing that unless you're also running a game that is utilizing those RT cores. So
we'll have to look at that. Like when we do some testing, it'll have to look at what the performance delta is between forcing it to run on like a GTX 1060 and then running it on an RTX 2060 and see if, it works on the 1060, but it's at like 60% utilization versus 15% hit on the 2060, for example.
Yeah.
And really, this isn't for streamers, although it would work very well for that. But think about the state of things right now, where it's just kind of commonplace now to have these big group chats where people are finally experiencing what those of us who've worked remotely for a long time know, which is you go into a web meeting and somebody invariably does not mute their phone or microphone or whatever they have, and you hear kids or animals or who knows what, and it would be amazing if something that worked effectively like this was in use by like every one of these services. Like if I logged into a WebEx meeting or had a Microsoft Teams call or something, it was just integrated into the software. This is early days, and it's cool that it exists. So it's like you were saying, Jim, like this is one of those exciting applications. It doesn't sound like a lot to a gamer, probably like, what, AI voice, who cares? Maybe it wouldn't have, but the timing of this is perfect because maybe they were working on this behind the scenes. They're like, you know what better time to give this to people than now? If you're on a Zoom call with somebody and want a nice silent background for yourself.
Like, remember VRWorks Audio? When NVIDIA was actually working on path-traced audio, like 4, maybe 5 years back. And they had a demo of like a cathedral and had different substances on the wall, and it changed all the audio. You know, maybe it's those guys saying, we did a lot of work before, let's put something out. And so right now, this is, it could be, I doubt there's going to be RTX audio anytime soon, regardless of what Guru 3D might have posted a few short weeks back. But, maybe it's just using some of the stuff that they had done there and that was developed, pre-RTX to say, hey, at least we've put some effort into it. Let's get something out there. And right now, as you're saying, the timing is right for this sort of sound cancellation noise.
Well, I was going to say too that this isn't this solution, NVIDIA is not the only one doing this. There are software solutions, which we'll mention here in a minute. There's other companies like Qualcomm, for example. I think it was at their event, maybe the middle of last year, they introduced a hardware solution that can do this for phone calls. And it's just baked into your Qualcomm chipset, and it's trying to basically do the same thing. But when I demoed it in its state last year, it was nowhere near this good. And they were just using software, I believe. I mean, it might have been accelerated to a certain extent, but it wasn't this like dedicated RT stuff. So this is better than I thought we'd get. But as I said, there is a software solution that just recently launched, and it's called CRISP, KRISP, and it's being a lot of people are using it with Discord, and it's the same basic theory, but it's not as good from the demos we've seen in terms of keeping your voice sounding normal when the background noise gets way too high. But I don't know, have you guys, any of you played around with CRISP?
Yeah, I tried it out, and when you're close to the mic and you're setting something off that's, background noise, it doesn't suppress it. If it's too fast an impulse, it doesn't really work very well either. If the attack is very, very quick, it doesn't catch it. For low-level noise that's constant, it suppresses it very well. I've actually got it configured on my system right now, but there's nothing going on here. I mean, I can turn it on. Let's see, if I do this, I'd have to switch inputs into the vMix. I can't quite do that right now. But yeah, I tried it out in the headset, and yeah, it does work. But it didn't catch everything that the RTX stuff did. But it's free to try.
The same virtual input or output device?
Yeah, it creates a virtual mic,
Yeah, okay.
and also it actually will do the exact same thing from a input-output perspective, meaning that if there's the 10-person Zoom call with annoying kids in the background, it's somebody's got something going on, you can actually fix your incoming audio into your speakers or your headset to quiet down everybody else. So it does both, which is nice.
Okay.
And it didn't bump the CPU at all when I was just playing around with it, but
It's
Interesting.
integrated into Discord. So the other day I was doing an impromptu little Discord stream in our voice channel, and I enabled it. And the thing is, because I have a loud furnace like 8 feet away, when that was on, it was acting like a noise gate. It was like a really aggressive noise gate, because when I would speak, suddenly all the background noise was there, and when I would stop talking, it would start to gate it down. I know that Discord does some noise gate stuff already. You have to go in and kind of configure your audio the way you want it, but it wasn't ideal. It sounds like, and I still have to try out this RTX voice thing myself, because the streaming PC I put together does have an RTX 2060 in it, so I have no excuse there, but that would be phenomenal. Like, because everything I've tried to this point, noise gates, different microphone patterns, the things that I've tried to do to isolate sound have not worked for the loudest noise, or like when my son is going crazy right above my head and toys and blocks come crashing down and it sounds like an explosion. It'd be nice if that kind of stuff was not picked up on a podcast.
Yeah, I mean,
or maybe it would be. Maybe that would be.
It depends on the tone of the show. Yeah,
could add excitement.
And CRISP is free in a limited sense. Like you can do it. It's 120 minutes per week. You can use it, and then if you want to unlimited usage, you've got to pay. It's a subscription. It's a monthly thing. So keep that in mind as you're looking at this. Whereas again, the RTX voice stuff is free if you've got the requisite card, or assuming NVIDIA doesn't patch this exploit, if you can edit the installer file. I did see somebody say, we should make sure to back up this installer, because if they do discover this workaround, they're going to definitely remove it going forward. So go download it now, keep it in a safe place. We'll see if they remotely nuke it or something. But all right, let's jump back to motherboard discussion. So this is some interesting information coming out of, Video Cards reported it, and it's based on some leaks from Gigabyte. Now, this is looking forward to the Intel's next platform, the Z490 chipset. We know that Rocket Lake, or we don't know, I guess, but it's highly assumed that Rocket Lake S, the desktop successor to Comet Lake S, is going to feature PCIe 4.0. Intel will finally catch up there. But these new Comet Lake chips and the Z490 boards that are going to be coming out to support them, apparently, or at least some boards, are putting in the groundwork to support PCIe 4.0. And that's what this leak out of Gigabyte says, where they've implemented the support. It's not going to work now because Intel's processors don't support them. But this is, again, additional confirmation that we will see PCIe 4.0 from Intel. And interesting that we can then expect that Rocket Lake will be pin compatible or socket compatible with Z490, so that you could upgrade to a Rocket Lake chip down the road. Those are expected at the end of this year, early next year, in that time frame. So, which is, Intel is not great with maintaining socket compatibility between generations. So we'll see going forward there if that holds out, because there's no other reason to implement this now if Comet Lake can't use it. So, what do you guys think?
Well, with caveats, I think is going to be the thing.
Mm. Yeah,
that's
limited.
sort of what it sounds like.
Yeah. Oh, did I see Rocket
about
League?
Damn time.
Rocket Lake.
You might have said Rocket League.
Rocket Lake.
Either way.
No, I think you
Yes.
did. Lake.
And again, because it makes sense that they would be compatible too, because Rocket Lake is going to be another 14 nanometer derivative. So I think it's Willow Cove.
Plus.
Yeah, I don't know how many pluses they'd be up to at that point, but it's going to be a further refinement of this process, this architecture that Intel's been stuck on. So
once they hit 10 pluses, that's the code that they're about to go 10 nanometers.
Oh, is
They're
okay.
really, really good at it now. Really good at it.
So it'll be good if this is true. We will see PCIe 4.0 on Intel. I know initially when they first fell behind AMD, there was some suggestion that they would even skip it, that they'd go right to PCIe 5, but that looks like it's going to be too long to wait. So getting more adoption there, bringing just a bigger market would be great, because we need faster storage. These new consoles that are coming up have crazy fast storage. We don't want to be left behind on PC ports of games that are optimized for 10 gigabytes a second of transfers. So we'll see.
One column on that threw me a bit.
Okay.
Daisy chain plus shielded memory routing. Now, maybe I just have missed some gigabyte branding at some point, but I'm trying to parse that in my head.
Yes, I don't know exactly what that is referring to.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Daisy chain plus. I don't know, but going back to PC and storage, Microsoft Flight Sim 2020, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Where it requires like 150 gigs plus a fast internet connection, because apparently you're going to be streaming in so much visual data.
Yeah. Well, we had that on our list for later in the show, but let's just talk about it now, because Josh gave us a segue. So,
why, sure.
50 megabits.
Ideally. Yes.
Is the ideal.
I like the ideal setup, yeah.
Right. So
that's nuts. I understand why, but
right. So Microsoft, of course, this is just to recap briefly. This is Microsoft's new flight simulator coming out, assumed to be later this year. It is a brand new engine. They've gone crazy with visual fidelity. They used Bing Maps to create ultra realistic environments, and all of the early visuals and previews. And there's also an insider beta right now. It all looks phenomenal. So we knew there was going to be some hits.
Look, Radeon 7, Sebastian.
Yeah. Finally a use for that.
Finally,
there you go.
For something.
Right. Yep. And so this
not
week,
just for folding anymore. And it's not really for that.
Yeah. It's great for folding though. It just chews through the workloads.
It runs so cool.
Yeah.
And it's a lot quieter than some of the other cards too, because as you know, there was only ever the one reference design with the 3-axial fans.
What?
And, yeah, I know there weren't a lot of aftermarket boards out there for some reason.
They came in boxes with different third-party labels on them.
Yeah,
it's just deceptive.
If only AMD had subsidized the price of all that ridiculously expensive HBM2 memory, but that's another.
But I tell you what, that 16 gigs of HBM2 plays the Division 2 beautifully. You haven't played Division 2 unless you've played it on a Radeon 7.
With all the textures.
Mm-hmm. Well, even then, actually, I don't think
you can't
it could max
throw
it out
enough
at 4K.
textures at it. I tried everything I could think of, and I think I finally found one game that I could play at just over 8 gigabytes of frame buffer.
Skyrim with 868 mods.
Oh, I didn't try that. But
oh,
here's the problem, though, that we're getting down a rabbit hole here. But at some point, frame buffer doesn't matter if your GPU can't keep up.
Yeah.
At the settings, you're trying to force it into this state. But like I did at one point play 8K Shadow of the Tomb Raider. I was downscaling it to fit my 4K monitor, but I was internally rendering it at 8K, and I was getting like 2 or 3 frames per second. So using like 10 or 11 gigs of frame buffer, though.
Well, nice. Anyway, what we're talking about is the
flight simulator.
The system
flight simulator.
They were released by Microsoft. They've broken it down. If you're listening to the audio version, they've broken it down into the min spec, recommended spec, and ideal spec for both AMD and NVIDIA. And as we were talking about initially, we knew it was going to be heavy on like compute, graphics and stuff just to keep it going. But because Microsoft has all these terabytes of world visual data building a real life, realistically laid out planet, they have to stream this stuff to you. So you don't only need a bunch of storage space. They're recommending 150 gigabytes across the board of free space.
That's min spec. Yeah.
Right. But you also need a fast internet connection. So they say a minimum spec 5 megabits. Okay. Recommended 20, ideal 50. And that's just because when you're flying through these worlds and seeing all this data load in, you've got to, if you have all the settings maxed out, that's a lot of visual data, a lot of textures, a lot of just a lot of information flowing in real time as you play. Now, you can play without the internet connection. In fact, it'll cache some stuff and it'll display and render at a certain level of detail. So if you don't have a fast enough connection or you don't have any connection at all, you'll still have some experience. But that really ultra realistic stuff you see in the trailers, you're gonna need a heck of a connection. So no Netflixing for the family while you're playing Flight Sim 2020, unfortunately.
So what if you get over Laramie? I can actually yell, "I can see my house from here," and I will.
Yes.
And then it'll be literally footage of you saying that in the game because they're just streaming video 24/7 everywhere.
Hey, honey,
live 20 minutes ago on the satellite. Yeah, that's me. I was outside mowing the lawn earlier today.
Bing has been kicked around for years now, but this is their moment. This is what they've been waiting for. Bing Maps, this is their moment to shine.
I don't know. Apple Maps or Bing Maps are the worst kicked around. Could be either one.
Well,
it depends. Like if you go back in time a few years, nothing was worse than Apple Maps, at least from a public perception.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, it cost their arguably the best successor to Steve Jobs his job.
That's right. It did.
Scott Forstall. He refused to apologize.
He could have rolled over and apologized,
but this is why he was a great replacement for Steve, because Steve wouldn't have apologized.
No, he wouldn't have.
So
he would have been forced out just like Scott Forstall was.
And that's why we have $6,000 MacBooks that continue to need to be replaced. This is my MacBooks in the shop again for the third time.
Oh, no.
Do you think... Now, I know that, Steve, let's just talk about this for a minute. Because I know that in the last few days, it's not on our list of topics, but Josh, do you want to talk again? Is that what the body language means?
No,
I just want to talk about the wheels and the feet.
Go ahead and do that. I will follow up.
It's a good one.
The wheels and the feet just came out. You can buy them now for the Mac Pro.
But
the wheels are $699 for a set of 4 wheels. And the feet, I didn't know this until I read this today on their website. The feet are $299. And the feet are the same ones that come with the Mac Pro. But if you were that person who configured your Mac Pro at checkout with the wheels, they didn't send the feet with the system. So you paid full price for the wheels and then you didn't get the feet. So if you want the feet instead of the wheels, you pay another $300.
I'm sorry, you're sounding like you maybe didn't expect that. That's your voice, your tone says this sounds weird.
I'm paying $6,000 for
we knew about
damn
them.
system. Give me the feet. At least somewhere in the box, just give me the feet, even if I bought the wheels. But
I'm sorry, that's a $300 add-in part at the cart.
Yep.
Oh, and would you like a monitor stand with that?
Well, yeah, the monitor stand is $1,000.
Josh,
what were you going to say?
You know what? This is going to be like the first Microsoft Flight Sim that I've bought since '98. Is that one of them?
Sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, I bought that for my father, who was a private pilot, and it was way back in the day, and that was the last one I bought. But looking at this, it's just it looks like it's going to be worth every penny. It is truly just a next generational product that you can't really pass up. I mean, even if you're not a big flight buff, it's, learn how to fly an airplane in that thing and fly around the world and see things that, we're stuck at home right now. If they could release it now, they probably would, and think that we're going to make a fortune. Yeah. Damn, it looks so good.
Pilot friends have told me this thing is really good, really cool.
Yeah, there's always been the battle because you've got X-Plane, which is another competing product, and Microsoft hasn't really updated since 2002,
forever,
maybe.
Yeah.
They did update. They had a Steam edition come out in, I think, 2012.
They had 10, but Flight Simulator 10X, right?
Oh, was it? Okay, that's right. There was. And then there was the Steam edition, which added like multiplayer and stuff. And then they had Microsoft Flight, which was in 2012, maybe. And that was the really bare bones, like dumbed down game. It was more of like an arcadey style. It had no accurate flight models. It had like only like 5 planes you could fly. And it was really controversial, and they canned it pretty quickly. So now they're coming back, but then you've got now looking ahead to this, you've got X-Plane, you've got Prepared, which is the one that a lot of training, like airlines train their pilots on. So it's going to come down to, does it look cool? And that'll win a certain segment of the market. And then are the flight models accurate? Is it actually going to respond like an actual aircraft would? And then that'll win over the hardcore sim guys. And Microsoft's saying it's going to be very, very accurate. So we'll have to see there. But another
story. Have like 25 years of experience in flight sims to lean upon.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but like I was saying, not so much recently. This is they kind of got out of the market for 10 years.
I think the original Microsoft Flight Sim was in the 80s.
Yeah, it
definitely was in the 80s.
It was an Apple, a Mac application. Crazy. But another game related story is that Valve's Proton project hit a new milestone recently. Of course, Valve's Proton is the Steam Play integration that allows Windows games to run on Linux. It's a modified Wine application or service, and so if you have Steam in Linux and you've got a compatible game, even if it was not built for Linux, it can run, and they've been constantly improving it over the last 2 years. It runs a lot of games really well, and they just hit the 6,500 mark. So there's 6,500 games. Windows games that now work on Linux with little to no effort on the gamer's part, as TechSpot phrased it here. So very good progress there. I remember, was it the Windows 8 era when Gabe freaked out over Microsoft and said they were going to become closed system, and then they very eagerly began work on Steam machines and Steam OS, and of course that all kind of fizzled out. But instead they found a solution here where you can just, if we can do the work for our developers to make the games run on Linux, then we don't need to sell Steam machines. We don't need Steam OS or whatever. So you guys ever played around with this stuff? It works really well for the games. I haven't tested it extensively, but it you just click play and it plays.
I've used Wine in the past. Wine worked pretty good when I was.
This is just a highly optimized game specific version of Wine. So.
Now, what I've read with the Proton stuff is that not everything really easily works out of the box. There are some like recipes that you have to go look up for like launch flags for the particular game, and that's kind of about it. So it's like most things in Linux. your mileage may vary depending on how experienced a keyboard warrior you are. You don't go into Linux and pretend everything's always going to work by just double clicking on it. That's just not the case.
Sure, and there's levels of compatibility. So it's called platinum, and if you have a game that's on the platinum list, it is basically out of the box a single click, and if it's not, there are communities that help you figure out how to optimize that. But good news there.
And at work, we got Ubuntu server, 1806, and none of my double clicking works at all. The mouse support is horrible.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. I've never encountered that.
Mm-hmm.
Seems to work for me.
It's all command line.
Oh, I see what you mean. I'm sorry. I misinterpreted.
The mouse
typing
support generally is fairly limited in CLI.
Gotcha. Well, I was just like, well, then run the GUI. I don't know.
Wake up, Jim.
I can't. I've got too many things in front of me. Let's talk about NVIDIA again real briefly here. A lot of companies, obviously, with the coronavirus situation, they're making gestures and statements. Well, NVIDIA came out and Jensen Huang gave released a letter to his employees. Now, the letter's dated April 14th, but I think it got published a couple days after that, and it was published on the it was an official release. It was put on LinkedIn by an NVIDIA PR person. The purpose of the letter was reassuring his employees about the stay at home and work from home and all that. But in the letter, he called out specifically that they're not going to be firing anyone. And in fact, they're accelerating their raises. I guess they were coming up to the point of the year where they had their performance reviews. And so they're just going to go ahead, and even if you weren't scheduled for it yet, if you were due a raise, you're going to get it now. So you can have more money in your pocket as we fight through this shutdown. And then he also talked about how they're continuing to work. They've joined the COVID HPC consortium, which is a bunch of companies, including AMD, who are all working together to donate computer resources and technologies to help understand the virus, develop treatments, things like that. And then he also mentioned that he's personally matching, in addition to the company's match, charitable donations made by employees. So if a group of employees get together and donate to a San Francisco charity, it'll be tripled. Like he'll match it out of pocket, and then the company will match it. So some great, good PR stuff from NVIDIA. Jensen's, I've never met Jensen, and he always has interesting press conferenes. He's a very demanding person. He wants things to go a certain way, and sometimes it doesn't go that way, and it gets a little awkward. But he seems to be a good guy, and having policies like this and statements like this is good at this time.
I met him a couple of times, and the first time I met him, I was introduced by Brian Berg, and I shook his hand, and he's like, Josh, good to meet you. And I looked at him, and I said, you're not as short as you seem.
Nice.
I've never been invited to another NVIDIA thing in my life. But
that's right.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
You should take that personally. Yeah.
I'm not as
smart. At least you weren't answering awkward questions in an F1 race.
Yeah, well.
All right. So let's finish up our news coverage this week. Our friends over at Legit Reviews, Nathan Kirsch over there, they just published recently, I think it was Monday, a gaming roundup comparing the 3950X to the 9900K. And Jeremy found this post for us and wrote up the news post linking to this coverage. Now, the interesting thing here is that this is a sponsored post. Yes. Intel partnered with Legit Reviews, and they do disclose that on the very first page at the very top. It says sponsored by Intel, and they do disclose that. So you have to keep that in mind, of course. But I will say that Legit Reviews and Nathan, he's legit. In other words,
or you could look at it as the absolute worst case scenario for testing AMD products.
Absolutely,
that's one way. So what I'm saying is,
still, as you can see, are matching, mostly beating.
Right.
They did as good as they were allowed to be.
Well, what my point is, I think the data here is accurate. I think they tested these conditions, and the test results are what the Legit Review team came up with. I don't think there's any manipulation of the data. The question is, is the testing conditions, which was certainly dictated by Intel as part of this sponsorship, do they make any sense? They tested at 1080p. They tested $500 and $750 processors at 1080p.
That is what made me post it. Mm-hmm. Because as I'm looking through, it's like, okay, Intel sponsored review. I've seen this before, and it will also be a good argument as to how good Ryzen 9 is. And I start getting into it, and something strange has happened on Steam. The user is logging in have jumped by 25%, and they're talking about users that haven't been on in quite a long while. There are Steam accounts, they just haven't really been active, but, you know, something's probably changed in the world that is convincing some of the old school gamers to fire up their old machines. And 87% of people playing Steam concurrently at the time that they checked were running at 1080p or lower resolutions.
Right.
So you've got a bunch of older systems getting fired up. And it's running an older monitor, it's running an older thing. And so if you're looking at it going, what is the number one thing that I could buy to upgrade my system that would actually matter? Well, mate, if you're running at 1080p Ti or at 1080p, it is not a 2080 Ti. That is dumb, and now you've got to talk someone into buying a new monitor for you too. But if you look at just is my CPU, and God only knows what CPUs these guys are running. There's probably Q6600s. There's some of the rebirthed Athlons, like they're older process. Like, what is the number one thing that you can do to upgrade? And, you know, looking at it, it's actually kind of interesting what you can pick up if you're willing to spend, you know, $500 to $700 on a CPU, and another $200 on a motherboard, and, you know, depending, another $200 on memory. And now all of a sudden you've unlocked a whole bunch of stuff. You haven't had to upgrade your monitor. You can still use your old video card, and at 1080p, you're fine. There was another review that I think Nick Tech put out that was comparing like a 980 Ti to the 2060. And yeah, if you're running a 980, don't buy a 2060. You will be upset unless you're really, really in love with RTX. So it went from being okay, this is something we've seen before and it'll be interesting to see exactly how they compare, to there is an actual good argument for doing a review about what can you expect at 1080 or lower.
But I mean, but not with this hardware though.
Well, I mean, you take the GPU right out of the picture if you're putting it in the top. Right. That performance is never going to change, but how do the different architectures go? And I mean, if you're bright enough and at this point you're a little bored, you start looking, okay, well, what if I don't buy the flagship one? What if I put myself on a budget? You know, is a Ryzen 7 actually going to stand up against an Intel of a similar price? And the answer is, hells yeah. Yeah, and quite often we'll beat it.
So we can see the results of how they tested here, these two platforms. And was it Brett, I believe, who said this would be like the worst case AMD system or setup for benchmarking?
I was implying that, yes.
And as you can see here, this might be a little hard to read. This is the aggregate of all the games they tested. Even though Intel does win in more games than they lose, AMD is very, very close. AMD does win in some cases. And then when it is losing, like here at CSGO, looking at the very left-hand bar here, and Intel is winning, but at 500 frames per second, and the AMD solution is giving you, what would that be, 475? So
it's a huge difference, right?
Yeah, I know some CSGO players are kind of nuts, but I don't know if that matters. At that high, like, you know, you're not talking about being able to hit 60 or not on a game. It's these crazy high frame rates. So I get what Jeremy's saying about looking at this market and looking at upgraders trying to see how they, you know, what can you do to get up to this modern games, improve your performance, your experience. But reviews like this, I don't see looking at just those two parts together as a comparison as it was intended to be. It's just not helpful. I don't believe anyone would put a 2080 Ti and then one of these flagship processors in a box and play at 1080p. And even if you are, and it doesn't really matter because the differences.
Well, you're a bloody
exist.
lunatic.
Yeah, the differences exist at the higher, like the most exaggerated differences are at frame rates that are so high that you won't notice.
What did you
I mean, if
Josh?
you put it on something older and limited the GPU,
yeah,
it's not a CPU test then.
You have to take that keyboard apart.
Oh, I didn't see that. I'm sorry, Josh. I didn't realize you had spilled. I thought you were just taking a bathroom break.
No.
Oh, is that your mechanical one?
A tragedy has occurred.
Oh well.
One of the interesting parts of this was the kinds of games that were actually the ones that were
washable
at the top of the list. That second link from the SteamDB was interesting. What was the top ones? That stuff had come out in 2013, 2015. Anyway, it was all fairly old stuff. Yeah. Global Offensive, Dota 2, PUBG is relatively new. GTA 5, of course. Rainbow Six, Destiny 2, Ark. Yeah, some of the stuff, if you hover over them, you can see the release dates on them.
Well, this was a snapshot of the top 50 games being played simultaneously. Yeah. Which also lends credence to the old gamers finally can. Holy crap, I've got time to game again.
But some of them were playing at 1366 by 1024 or 768. I did. I just got out a really old PC and I was posting this the other day. I actually played Need for Speed 2 Hot Pursuit with the old steering wheel. It was fun. Oh my gosh, it was great.
CSGO
beautiful Trinitron CRT.
Yes, I did. I got one of my Trinitrons out there, and the frame rate was
the response rate.
It was CRT. That was like I think I cranked it up to like 85 hertz.
0.
Yeah, absolutely zero lag. And yeah, CSGO is getting historically high concurrent players.
I just hope the old guys are just owning the younger kids. That's what
I was surprised to see Bannerlord, Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord so high, because that game was in development for a long time, and it seemed like for a while there
problems.
Well, I've got a chance to play it. I got the early access, and it was pretty smooth. Considering it was better than I expected it to be, based on the previous games and the development cycle, the way that seemed like it was going. But that's a lot of people who picked that game up. That's good. But all right, well, let's finish up to this week. We've got a review. Oh, go ahead.
Before the review, can I just rant about this LR piece for like 60 seconds?
Okay.
Because you were talking, Jim, you talked extensively about the fact that it doesn't make any sense to play games at this resolution with that level of equipment. And they're talking about computer build costs of around $3,000 for these high-end game systems put together. And of course that doesn't make any sense, but then again, CPU benchmarking doesn't make any sense because there's two applications for a CPU. There's compute, and then there's the CPU is in the background while you're pushing some big GPU along. And to try to find the bottleneck is the great exercise in reviewing this stuff. At one point in the past, I decided, younger me thought I can figure this out. And I bought all this crap and I put together 16 different systems and ran benchmarks every day after work and all day on my days off for what seemed like about 4 months. I put together this giant piece for the website back then. And in the end, there were so many inconsistencies with my results, which I was discovering as I was creating my charts. Like, oh crap, I don't even have that GPU anymore. I sold that one to pay for this one that I bought. And was the memory speed the same on these two systems? I don't remember anymore. And to the best of my knowledge, it was. But then you run into, anytime there's multiple problems here, but one of them is anytime you have such a large undertaking, when you're putting this many games through testing, there could be driver issues. There could be a process running in the background that was, when you're at 500 frames per second is what I'm trying to say. And another run is 480. Maybe that was a update running in the background you don't realize. What if Steam client was downloading something right when you were doing your run? And that accounted for like a 0.01% variance. But when you're at 5 or 6 or 700 frames per second, like they would in some of these games, we're talking about Warframe at 700 frames per second. And human fall flat, something I'm not even familiar with that, but Intel was able to manage about 730 frames per second, apparently, when the AMD system is only able to manage somewhere over 500. So it's ludicrous, but they did this for a reason. They set the test parameters. They basically provided the instructions on how to run the tests. And it was run that way because it was a sponsored post. It wasn't like I get instructions too, I then throw them away and create my own tests and do my own clean install of the operating system. It's you always can just follow the book with a review and follow the reviewer's guide exactly, and all you're doing at that point is validating their internal testing. But if you don't use their configuration and you don't use their exact parameters or the games that they recommend running, and AMD can do this too. Like they could pick the games that do absolutely the best on AMD hardware and then show chart after chart of their game beating an Intel system for whatever, at whatever resolution and whatever detail settings they've determined internally show them in the best light. But it is difficult to justify doing this, but at the same time, how else are you supposed to show the variance? Because it doesn't matter if you're using a $500 card or a $700 card or this $1,200 2080 Ti. Once you start gaming at, say, 1440p or higher, you are no longer CPU bound unless your CPU is underpowered enough that it's actually holding the GPU back. And that's something that changes every generation. And it also depends on the game, because it's not like every single game is 100% GPU bound versus CPU bound, for example. So, Civilization 6 is not exactly the same mix between CPU and GPU as the newest 3D title. It's just not. So it's a frustratingly inconsistent thing to try to benchmark CPUs for gaming performance. Anyway, we end up doing it at 1080p, not because everybody else does, but because that's the only way to show variance, and especially at lower settings. If I do 1080 high, I can show you variance between a 3950X and a 9900K. But if I move the resolution up to 1440 Ultra, which is where I would personally be playing with that system with a 2080 to get a nice high smooth frame rate, especially at a high refresh monitor, there's no variance anymore, unless the game happens to be really CPU bound and it can take advantage of those extra threads from the AMD part. So it's funny it's almost laughable to see the frames per second numbers and to see the list of games chosen. And I know that they can justify it because they can say, well, these are the most played games on Steam. Well, of course they are, because they are either free or they've been out for so long that they're basically free. And they're also games that have a strong multiplayer component and are extremely popular to be played online together. And you can play Dota 2 on anything. So why are we benchmarking it? I was that on the benchmark list? I know Counter-Strike will run on almost anything. Yet we're benchmarking it in 2020 on a 2080 Ti.
Yeah, Dota was there.
Yeah, Dota was definitely there. No, the benchmark was just ridiculous. Like, there is no good argument for choosing your CPU based on how it is going to game with a top-end video card. And in a way, I would have been more interested to see this on, older hardware that you would expect to see on a 1080p system. But still,
interesting.
A waste of time.
Yeah.
Well, honestly, it's still an
it wasn't a waste of time because it was something that helps keep the site going. And absolutely, anybody who's in this and
they said that
is independent. Right. And he said that in his own comments, like people defending the article and saying, look, ad revenue is not where it used to be, and to keep a site like this going, we've got to do things like sponsored posts, which is true. And people always dump on you for doing a sponsored post, and he was upfront about it. I'm just looking at Intel's parameters and what Intel told him to do to earn the payment that the site was able to receive to keep them going for doing the sponsored article is kind of ridiculous. And it would have been better for them to have maybe some more taxing games and some more realistic gaming scenarios to show the advantage, even if they're showing a deficit. How about, hey, we think that our product is better because of the platform and because of this and because of that. But it's harder and harder for them to find those positives when AMD can say, actually, we have way more PCIe lanes than you do. And we have faster PCI Express connectivity than you do. And we're cheaper per core than you are. And et cetera, et cetera. So right now, AMD seems to be leading in almost every conceivable category, except for Intel can say, oh, no, wait a minute. When you push things up really, really, really high, we can show a slight difference, an advantage for us in these older games. And that's not always the case. And I've seen myself that a 9900K. Well, there are absolutely cases where an Intel processor is faster in gaming, but you're probably not going to see them unless you are running at 1080p.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's, the question of why, Intel it would have been more valuable had Intel done certain things in their requirements, but this is, as basically you said the same thing, Sebastian, but this is it. This is where right now with Intel's current roadmap, this is where they can show an advantage. This is where these are the conditions and pretty much the only conditions in which the blue line goes higher than the red line. So that's why, of course, they're going to, they're going to cherry pick and manipulate things. And it's the same thing. I mean, this isn't surprising. Intel's been giving this kind of information to us in their press kits for a while now, since they fell behind Ryzen, and pointing to, games saying that they're popular, even though they are less demanding, and looking at the frame rate advantage. And then, of course, AMD, when AMD shows off games and when AMD does deals like this, I would presume they pick, they ask certain games to be highlighted or certain use cases that support them, like Cinebench. Intel doesn't want us using Cinebench. AMD always talks about Cinebench. They'd go nuts if we didn't use Cinebench. So
especially the single core, which is just amazing.
It is. That's the craziest part. I mean, these massive multi-core chips that still kick ass in single core. It's incredible. So,
and by the way, if you're going to compare apples to apples and say that this is their chip versus our chip, go with the same price point. Go with the 3900X versus the 9900K. What is the problem here? Well, the problem is in that list of components, when it shows that the Intel was the cheaper build by $100 or $200, that would not have been the case if you were using the $750 CPU on the AMD system.
Yes.
So, or 738 or whatever it was at the time. So there is no, I would struggle in a review myself to find the difference between an appreciable difference between the 3900X and the 3950X for gaming. They're so close, and very few, if any, games are going to take a significant advantage of the extra cores that the 3950X would provide, because you're already at 12 cores, 24 threads with that 3900X, and you're within 100 or so megahertz of each other anyway. So that is a problem right there, where if you're going to compare 3950X to an Intel part, it would at least need to be the 9900KS, but that part basically doesn't exist. That was announced, it was launched, it was briefly available, reviewers got it, I got one. It performs admirably, but you cannot currently buy one. And I've recently looked on eBay.
The Truckee Shroud version.
Yeah, it's a rare product. It commands a pretty sizable price, even used. So
let me jump in real quick here. I missed this a while ago. I apologize, but we had a new Patreon contribution come in about an hour ago. Greg R became a new patron, so thank you, Greg. And I apologize, I didn't catch that till just now. So,
cheers, man.
Thank you very much. Oh, and actually, we had another one just in the last minute come in. Wayne Perlisco. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, but thank you, Wayne. He just became a new patron. So awesome.
Well, the entertainment value is extremely high tonight.
Yeah, all we have to do is dump on Intel and we get patrons. How does that work? I don't know.
Either that or I just destroy a keyboard for the first time ever in my life. I've never poured a drink on a keyboard. Ever. Wow. My children have, my wife have.
I got to say,
so you just didn't get to it first.
Yep. That's a guilt that stays with you, actually. It never leaves.
It is.
Did the liquid get into the camera? Because now you're all blown out now. Your color balance went haywire.
Yeah, I don't know. I it had to do something with that.
He's just having a physical reaction
right now, And you're talking about camera white balance. Come on.
I'm dealing with the problems I can deal with in front of me. But what we need to do is send Josh over to the mechanical keyboard subreddit and let him spend all his money. And I'm sure we'll find something there for him.
Their custom keyboards are ridiculous. Don't go there. Unless that's your thing.
It's
Never do a keycap review.
It's a dark path.
Yeah.
It is.
That's a very subtle transition, by the way.
But yeah, let's finish up. We've got a review of a new Cooler Master AIO liquid cooler. This is from Kent. He got us the review of the Cooler Master MasterLiquid ML240L V2 RGB. Tell us what did Kent find here with this this I think it was $80 cooler, right?
Oh yeah, it's really inexpensive. Its full list price is $79.99. It just launched, I think, today officially. At least today is when the review embargo was up. But it's an update. If you go searching for the ML240L, you're going to find it, and it's not going to make any sense because it's going to look different, and the pricing will not be the same. And this is V2, version 2. So you have to be careful with that right off the bat. But anyway, version 2, they set out to completely redesign the pump. That was probably the biggest change here. So they have what they call their new generation. It's their 3rd generation dual chamber pump. And there are some new fans at play here. A little bit more on that later. These are RGB fans. They also said that with the pump, and actually with everything, it's reinforced sealing for anti-leak prevention, as they're saying. I didn't know of any severe leak issues with Cooler Master designs in the past. This is an Asetek design, but anyway, they're taking steps to make sure that it doesn't leak even longer, apparently, than before. I was looking at pictures of like the cross section of the new pump assembly and the way that it works, and not to jump too far ahead, but apparently it is also very quiet. The pump is. So very interesting to see them come up with something new and better in a pump, and especially at this price point. To put that kind of attention into something where their 120 millimeter model is going to retail for $69 and the 240 is only $10 more. But getting a little bit further into this, Kent, he revamped his testing and he went ahead and retested everything and just comparing. I'll skip past mounting and that sort of thing because A, it doesn't make any sense on an audio podcast if you're listening, and B, it's better to look at the pictures on the website anyway if you can. He always takes lots of high quality photos in his reviews, so definitely check out the review on the website. He does go into thermal and noise testing, of course. Switch things up a little bit, is using a Ryzen 7 3600X overclock. This is at 4.3 gigahertz on all cores. He did that at 1.4 volts. And above ambient temps, it was very close. It was within a degree. And I always do plus minus 1 degree on all my testing because at any given time, when you're dealing with whole numbers, like I'm getting a whole number readout for either the ambient temp or the CPU temp, it could be one or the other. So it's within a rounding error here between it and what had previously been his highest performing cooler that he has, which is a Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 3. So on his Ryzen 7 3600X overclocked, one of them had a load of 55.3 above ambient, and that was the Dark Rock. And then the Cooler Master was right behind it, 0.7 degrees higher at 56. That was cooler than everything else he's tested recently. So not any other liquid coolers on here, but this is just, I think it's interesting to look at this compared to some of the medium and larger air coolers like he did, because that's the price point. And as he points out in the review, a lot of the competition for this 240 millimeter all-in-one is $100 or more. And the most recent Corsair we looked at was in the $120 range. And that's pretty standard for high-end dual radiator liquid coolers, like the dual width radiator liquid coolers like this. So what didn't perform so well was overall noise output. And he said the pump, and he did a pump only sound test. So it was 30 decibels. And that is very quiet. He said that even spinning along at its full speed of 2,500 RPM, I'm quoting here, never emitted more than 30 dB. And he said, I cannot praise the new sickle flow fans quite as highly as the new pump. So unfortunately, at load, these fans were at 44.5 dB, with his noise meter. And that's quieter than, say, the stock cooler with his AMD CPU that he was testing, but you wouldn't want to use the stock cooler in an overclock situation like this anyway, because it would just be going 100% and not able to keep up. But very good temps, but unfortunately at a cost. So if you were to look into this, it sounds like they have the basis of a great solution, a high-end solution, but it's priced very inexpensively. So if I were to buy one of these, I would have to budget in a couple of really quiet but high pressure fans suitable for a radiator application like this. So at that point, if I care about noise, this is no longer an $80 cooler. It becomes like a $120 cooler, which is exactly where you are with things like the Corsair IQ 240 that we reviewed recently. So, and then as far as the RGB application of these, he has some photos in the review. You can see it's single RGB. Like you can choose a color, but that's it. Like you can cycle through with the controller or use a available motherboard header, but it's the sort of old school RGB where it's like it's either purple or it's green or it's red. So you don't have like the crazy like 8 or 16 zone ARGB lighting of one of those Corsairs. But I mean, if all you need is cooling performance at $79, it's tempting. And one of the things he talks about is just the clearance issues. And this is why I've sort of reluctantly gone back to using all-in-one liquid coolers on test beds here. When I'm swapping a lot of CPUs or memory or GPUs, it is so much more convenient to have an all-in-one because the pump assembly is out of the way of everything. It doesn't interfere with memory. It doesn't interfere with the GPU retention latch on the PCIe slot. And I mean, I went from using a big Noctua cooler and having to push a screwdriver down into the space between the back of my GPU and the edge of the heatsink because I could not get to the release on the top PCIe slot any other way, to now I just, swap components without even thinking about it because everything's out of the way. So there is a huge convenience factor with something like this. And there are also cases where he's doing all open test bench. One of the areas too where all-in-one shine is if you have any kind of a thermally constrained enclosure that does allow for like a 240 millimeter rad like this. Maybe that goes along the top. Suddenly, all of your warm air is just immediately exiting the top of the case, and it's drawing warm air from the system up with it as it expels the CPU, like the warm CPU air as well. So it can be great for certain applications over a large air cooler, or in instances where you just don't have the clearance for a really big one. But I don't know. It's heartening for me to see Cooler Master pay this much attention to something like pump design for what will invariably be their cheapest 240 millimeter option. I can't see them releasing something under $79, but obviously you're going to want to bring quieter fans to the table if you care about noise.
All right. So that is the Cooler Master MasterLiquid ML240L V2. The V2 is important because otherwise you'll be buying the old model. Real quick here, so that Patreon, Wayne, our newest Patreon contributor, he had actually sent a message after his contribution. I just got that in my inbox here. Now this was about 10 minutes ago, so I think we were talking about the legit review stuff. And his message is only, Sebastian is right. Don't know specifically what, but we'll just blanket and just say, just in general, Sebastian is right.
It doesn't matter what he was talking about because it's correct.
Yes.
That is always correct.
So
yes.
Thank you,
Unless
Wayne.
I'm completely wrong, I am almost always right.
Right.
But then you're still right in your wrongness. It's totally rightly wrong.
You're right.
Yes.
Right. So when you're right, you're right.
And I will be the first to admit that I'm wrong, and that will be right. In fact, I can think of no circumstance when I am not forthright and correct, even when I'm wrong.
And in that way, you're right.
Mm-hmm. It's integrity, people.
Okay, so let's get the picks of the week. Sebastian, did you have one you wanted to throw in there before we start?
No, I forgot about that. So
okay, that's no problem. So I'll start off with mine. Now, this was something I thought everyone knew about, but then I realized it was 25 years ago, and there's like whole generations of enthusiasts, computer enthusiasts who were not even born. But it's amazing. You know, they called Endgame the most ambitious crossover in history, but they're wrong. It's actually the Microsoft Windows 95 video training guide featuring Friends stars Jennifer Aniston and Matthew Perry. This was a video cassette that was sent out to people who had pre-ordered a Windows 95 compatible system. In our case, it was a Dell, I believe. We had pre-ordered, 95 was going to be the next big thing. They sent this videotape out a couple weeks before the system shipped, and it was incredible. Now, I wasn't the biggest Friends fan at that point, but I mean, I knew who these people were, and it was just crazy to see this very geeky little thing, merging into the tech realm, and it's hilarious. This is we'll link to this. It's on YouTube. It's a pretty good transfer of that VHS tape, and it's an hour long or so, and it shows these two characters, these two actors meeting Microsoft reps and walking through the Windows 95 system, because this was, it's old fashioned to us now, but for most consumers, you were coming from Windows 3.1 or a Mac even at that point in time. And the notion of a start button and a control panel and changing your desktop wallpaper and all these things that Windows has introduced, it was new. And so you had to have some way to teach the masses how this all works. So check that out if you haven't seen it. It's the Windows 95 video guide from Microsoft featuring Jennifer Aniston and Matthew Perry. So
for the rest of you, counselors are standing by on the lines to.
Oh, I mean, it's awful. Don't get me wrong, it's awful. But it's one of those like good awful things where it's like a bad B movie you can watch and laugh at, especially if you remember those times.
That's Office Space. That's not this commercial.
Well, Office Space is legitimately good. This is bad good.
By the way, I have to say, North Ranger in our Discord, Chandler is where Bing got its name. It all makes sense now.
It does. It was the long con. Yeah.
And everybody's useful.
And these, I mean, you got to remember too, 95. These are two of the biggest stars in entertainment at that point. That show was like the number one show on television. To see a big crowd, it would be like, I don't know, who's popular today? I don't even know.
God only knows.
Well, it was like pick your pop star, whatever that is, and then have them do an AMD video or something. It's like, oh, that's okay.
You're saying Lisa Sue isn't a pop star?
Well, she's getting a lot of attention. She was just in a couple.
Apparently, there's a new puppy in my house. Visiting us?
Oh,
and so we need to hurry things along.
Oh,
because I would like to actually meet this puppy before it leaves.
Okay, let's go. Jeremy, quickly, your pick for us.
Oh, God, I had nothing. But speaking of old stuff, we don't have a sponsor, so old shite. Steam is having a Beanbog sale. So if you haven't picked up the original Baldur's Gate Enhanced, the Icewind Dale Enhanced, Baldur's Gate 2 Enhanced, Planescape Enhanced, or some of the ones that they made themselves, like Siege of Dragonspear and that, they're dirt cheap right now. So if you don't have them via Good Old Games or anything else, it's worth it, because if you haven't played the Enhanced Editions, they do actually add a lot to the games and make it well worth playing. And besides, when was the last time you replayed Baldur's Gate?
Good question. I've never played it, so maybe this is the time. All right, Josh, your pick.
Me. Okay. You know what? Josh Tech PC Per Dirt Rally 2.0 community is, we got 3 or 4 people joining in. We'd like more. It's relatively inexpensive. Get the full version. Well, I mean, $60, but they've added to it significantly from when it was released last year. So if you haven't picked it up, if you really are getting cabin fever, you want to do some racing, it's a beautiful game. It's pretty accurate in terms of driving. And yeah, you get to race against me and others. So yes, buy it. Come join Josh Tech, please.
All right. And Brett, you've got the last pick for us?
Yeah, I do. So a lot of people are stuck at home, obviously are discovering that their PC that they may be gaming on at 1440p may be suddenly under-monitored. And what I mean by that is that when you're trying to maybe have your 10-person Zoom call and you're trying to work at the same time, you need another display. But you don't want to get just a 1080p display, right? Because you're already at 1440p. So there's this. This thing doesn't have a stand, but you're probably going to get a dual monitor stand with that, or you can just go over to Monoprice and pick a stand up. But this is a 2K display, 2560 by 1440, quote unquote new, open box, refurbished, but new, as they say, new open box for $249. We ordered one. I'll let you know how it is when I get it in.
All right, so that's the HP Z27N G2. It's a 27-inch IPS display, 2560 by 1440, 60 hertz. So your productivity, but 250.
So it's your second display. It's your second display.
Right. Excellent.
Right. So you've got your first display. Get your second one.
I'm a little concerned about the resolution, Brett, because how am I going to showcase the superiority of my Intel processor at 1440?
You can always run it.
1080p monitor.
You can always force it to run at a lower resolution and just put up.
But then it'll look kind of blurry. Yeah.
Okay. Time's up. I've got to run. I'm really sorry.
See you, Josh.
That's all right. So
I love you, Josh.
We're going to close it there. Josh is going to go play with a puppy. If you're watching live, the rest of us are going to hang around for just a bit and answer your questions in the YouTube and Discord chats. But to everyone else, thanks so much for hanging out with us. We hope everyone continues to be safe, be well. We'll see you next week.